Let's think about tonight's lesson, and let me start by asking you the most important question that you will ever be asked. Do you believe with all of your heart that Jesus is the Son of God? You believe that? Some of you have been asked that question before. Some of you have been asked that question before going into some water, like the water that we have behind us, in order to be baptized for the remission of your sins. And at that moment, you were willing to make the good confession of your faith in Jesus Christ. But that's a pretty easy place to make that confession, isn't it? I mean, to stand up in front of other people who believe that Jesus is the Son of God and to say, yes, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that's of all the places to make that confession, that's a fairly easy place, is it not? Sometimes we use Acts chapter 8 to talk about that, where the Ethiopian was riding along in a chariot. He saw some water. He said, look, here's water. What hinders me from being baptized? And in Acts 8 and verse 37, Philip said, if you believe with all of your heart that Jesus is the Son of God. That's a prerequisite. You've got to believe that, and you've got to be willing to confess that before you can be baptized. Another verse that we sometimes use for making that confession is Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 32, the Bible says, if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus, and believe, well, that's Romans chapter 10, sorry. Jesus says, if you confess me before men, him will I confess before my Father in heaven. But that context in Matthew 10, we don't have time to dig into the context, but that context of if whoever confesses me before men is a different kind of context than what you confessed in front of other people who believed. Read Matthew chapter 10 sometime and put verse 32 in context. Because Matthew chapter 10, you go back into verse 14, and it's going to talk about you go to people and they reject you, and they won't receive you. In verse 16, Jesus says, I'm sending you out in the midst of wolves. In verse 17, he says, these wolves are going to deliver you up, and they're going to scourge you. Verse 21, your family is going to leave you and to split from you because of your faith. Verse 22, you are going to be hated. Verse 23, you're going to be persecuted. Verse 28, you might even be killed. That's the context of verse 32 that says, whoever confesses. Well, who's going to confess Jesus in that kind of a context? Somebody who really, truly believes that Jesus is the Son of God. And so I want to ask you again. Not have you heard it, not do you wish it, not do you think somebody else, are you absolutely certain tonight and believe with all of your heart that He is the Son of God? I want you tonight to leave here absolutely, not certain that David believes it, not certain that the church teaches it. I want you to be absolutely certain. You say, okay, how can I be absolutely certain? In Acts chapter 17, we have the example of the Apostle Paul. You know the Apostle Paul went on these missionary journeys. He comes into cities and he preaches to people. Some of these people had never heard about Jesus before. Never heard about Jesus before. And he comes in and he preaches them about Jesus, and they came to believe not just that this man Jesus lived, they came to believe that there was a man named Jesus, that he was from Nazareth, and that he fulfilled all of the Old Testament prophecies, and he really is the Son of God. How did Paul convince people who had never heard of Jesus that he's the Son of God? That's what I want to do tonight. I want to do what the Apostle Paul did. Acts chapter 17 says he came into these cities, and in Acts chapter 17 and verse 2, it says that he reasoned with them from the Scriptures. Question, which Scriptures did Paul use to prove Jesus is the Son of God? Did he use Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Shake your head this way. Those books hadn't been written yet. He couldn't use Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to talk to them about Jesus. What Scriptures did he use to prove to them that Jesus is the Son of God? Genesis through Malachi. Your Old Testament. You think, wait a minute. You've got to have the New Testament. You don't have to have the New Testament to prove Jesus is the Son of God. Paul didn't have the New. Well, what did he have? Paul had those Old Testament Scriptures, and verse 3 says what he did is that he laid down the Old Testament Scriptures. He said, let me show you the prophecies that are made in the Old Testament about Jesus, about the coming Messiah. And then he said, let me tell you about this guy named Jesus who lived in this area of Judea, and I want to explain to you what this man Jesus from Nazareth did. What did he do? Here's the Old Testament prophecies. Here's Jesus, and he laid Jesus down next. And when somebody looks at those prophecies and they look at Jesus, what do they know? Oh, look at this. This guy over here that I've never heard of, he fulfilled all of these prophecies. He really is the Christ, the Son of God, and it changed their lives. Maybe you've done this before. Have you ever gone to your closet and you pulled out a pair of pants, but you were like, are those black pants or are those navy pants? You ever done this? I do this. Are those black pants? Because you got to get the right color, because you don't want to wear the wrong pants with the wrong jacket. That would look silly. So you go to your closet, are those black pants or are those navy pants? Sometimes I can't tell the difference. Josh, you ever have a problem telling the difference? Yeah, okay. So you know what I do? I'll go and get a pair of socks that I know are black. I know they're black. So I lay down this black pair of socks. I know they're black. And I bring the pair of pants alongside it, and guess what I figure out really quickly? What color those pants are. Do those pants match the socks, or are those pants a different color? That's what Paul did. He didn't lay down his socks. He laid down what they knew to be true. You know those socks are black. He laid down what they knew to be true. Who's this Jesus guy? Oh, wait. He really is this one that's been promised in the Old Testament. And so tonight what I want us to do is I want us to examine some of these prophecies that were made in the Old Testament, because here's the deal. If you want to be proven to be an absolute fraud in a hurry, if you want to prove yourself to be an absolute fraud in a hurry, then what you need to do is start making a lot of predictions about the future. How well are you going to make predictions about the future? Oh, let me clarify. Don't just make predictions about the future, but make predictions about the future that are very specific about the future. And guess what people are going to learn really quick? You don't have a clue. You don't know anything about the future. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, that's what God said. That's how you tell what a false prophet that's how you tell a true prophet from a false prophet. In Deuteronomy 18 and verse 21, he says, look at this prophet, and if what he says comes true, okay, now you know. But if what he says doesn't come true, yep, now you know that too. Is it possible? Listen to this 5-letter word. Is it possible not just to believe, not just to think, is it possible to prove Jesus is the Son of God? You get into a conversation with somebody and they want to know about your faith. Can you prove it? Not that you have a blind faith, not that, well, I believe this because my parents taught it to me. I believe this because the preacher said it. Forget all that. That's not going to get you anywhere. Can you prove that Jesus is the Son of God? That's what I want to do tonight. And I want us to examine all 332 prophecies that are made about Jesus in the Bible. Are you ready? All three. Would that be something? You're like, David, I haven't eaten dinner yet. I haven't either, all right? Let's just feast on the Word of God. No, we're not going to look at all 332 prophecies. But if you wanted to be proven a fraud, you'd talk about the future. Was God proven a fraud by talking about the future? By making all of these predictions? Every one of these predictions about Jesus came true. And so tonight I want to start talking with you about some criteria. And these are criteria that individuals have laid out and said, okay, these are criteria that have to be in place in order to prove that a predictive prophecy that is valid. You know, all sorts of people, you can make a prediction about the future. Okay, is it valid? That's the key word here on the screen. Is a prophecy that's been made about the future, is it valid? Here's 5 quick criteria that if you want to know if a prophecy is legit, is valid. Number 1, it had to have specific, detailed information in it. For a prophecy to be valid, it had to be a specific, detailed declaration. In other words, it couldn't be generic. A prophecy that's valid could not say, oh, you're going to meet a nice person next week. Oh, fantastic. Define nice for me. Define when and next. I mean, you're going to be a nice person. That could be anybody, anywhere, anytime. That's not specific. That's very generic. The prophecies that are made about Jesus in the Old Testament, are they specific? Are they a specific, detailed declaration? Number two, in order for a prophecy to be valid, criteria number two is there must be sufficient time between the time of the prophecy and the time of its fulfillment. What if they made a prophecy, a minute before it took place? Oh, wow, okay, he saw that one coming. But if it's going to be a valid prophecy, there's got to be a decent amount of time between when it was made and when it was actually fulfilled. And the purpose of that is so that the guy making the prophecy, he can't influence the fulfillment. All right, so here's a prophecy for you. Children, you listening? The children who are here tonight, here's a prophecy for you. I'm making a prophecy. If you will bring your sermon notes to Mrs. Tracy tonight, she's going to give you candy. Is that a valid prophecy? Well, it's valid. It's true because I bought the candy for her. I know she's going to give it to you, but I influence the outcome. And there's not sufficient time, is there? That's a big deal. Anybody could make that. So what about Bible prophecies? Was there time in between so that the guy making the prophecy did not have an influence on the fulfillment of the prophecy? Criteria number three is that it must be stated in clear, understandable terms. Not vague, not general, but clear, understandable. And what does this mean? So when you read through prophecies in the Old Testament, is it clear when they were fulfilled and that it happened? I asked my friend this past week, maybe you have a friend with this same name. I asked ChatGPT this last week. I said, hey, ChatGPT, I want you to give me a prophecy about the future, but I want you to use legal terms in the prophecy. All right? So here's a prophecy that ChatGPT gave to me this past week. Are you ready? Considering the present trajectory of socioeconomic factors, there exists a substantial likelihood that, absent any material deviations or force majeure events, the future will manifest a de facto consolidation of market dominion, which could result in an imperceptible yet consequential alteration of the competitive landscape. Should these conditions be met, it is plausible that an actionable claim for anti-competitive behavior under the auspices of antitrust law may arise, triggering potential class action suits or regulatory intervention pursuant to the Sherman Act or similar legislative frameworks, thereby imposing prospective liabilities on the perpetuating entities. Wow, okay. All right. Did you understand any of that? Some of you are looking at Tracy and feeling really sorry for Tracy over these last few minutes. I shared ChatGPT's prediction with her so that she could know what was going on. Did you understand that? You know what ChatGPT was saying? ChatGPT gave me this simpler terms. It says, market dominance might increase, and if it does, lawsuits will come. Oh, I get that. Aren't you glad that when the Bible gives these predictions that it didn't terms? Have you ever picked up a legal document and you're like, I have no idea what that just said? That's not the predictions in the Bible. Criteria number 4, it must not have historical overtones. You can't make a prediction that's based upon things that have always happened in the past, because if they've always been happening in the past, well, what does that mean about the future? Well, it's probably going to happen again. Here's a prediction for you. I predict that later this year, in fact, I'm going to get specific with you. I predict on December 25th of this year, you're going to have a tree in your house that has lights on it. I'm a prophet. I'm a prophet because guess what's going to happen on December 25th? You're going to walk in your house and you're going to be like, David's a prophet. He just prophesied. What? Does that have historical overtones? Yeah, because guess what you've had in your house every December 25th? What, you get the point? You can't make a prediction based upon what's always been. Predictions about Jesus. These prophecies about Jesus, did they have historic? Well, there's always been a Messiah coming, so we're just going to make those. No, not at all. Criteria final number 5 is that when you get over to the fulfillment, Just as there has to be a clear, understandable prophecy, when you get over to the fulfillment, there can't be any ambiguity about the fulfillment. Was it fulfilled? Was it not? We're not really sure if it was. You have to have absolute certainty that it was fulfilled. So these aren't criteria that Christians have made up, all right? These are criteria that individuals, even unbelievers, would say, these have to be in place for a prophecy to be valid. Run your brain through these 5 criteria. Do the prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament, do they meet these criteria? Let's look at just a few of them, all right? Let's consider the evidence. And when you start looking at the evidence, what you find is that messianic prophecies were very specific. How specific? Here's just a few, and we won't leave these up long enough for you to write all of these down. But is this specific? God said He's going to come from not a tribe, He picked the tribe. He's going to come from the tribe of Judah. And at some point in His life, He's going to be called out of a country somewhere on the, no, specific. He named the country Egypt. He's going to be a priest. That's specific. What kind of priest? Not after the order of Judah. Well, if he's not there, what kind of priest? You're picking this guy named Melchizedek? I love this prophecy from Zechariah chapter 9. He's going to ride on what? A donkey. And not just any donkey, a young donkey. And he's going to ride into a city, the city of Jerusalem. You see how specific God gets? He says that there's going to be someone who betrays Him for 20 pieces, 25. Somewhere around, does He say somewhere around? No. He picks the number. 30 pieces of gold, bronze, silver specifies it. He says this man is going to be spit upon. He says this man is going to be buried. Why not just say he's going to be buried? Of course he is. Everybody dies. He's going to be buried with the rich. And this is just, how many is this? 7? This is just 7. Are these specific? Yeah, they meet that criteria that people say has to be in place for a prophecy to be valid. And you read other prophecies, and we'll see some more in just a minute, to see God wasn't just speaking in generalities. Oh, He's going to come and He's going to live in a place and He's going to do nice things and people are going to be mean to Him. Oh, okay, that's like everybody on earth. No, they were specific. Number 2, when you read about these prophecies about this coming Messiah, they were made centuries before they were fulfilled. Remember the criteria? There has to be sufficient time between the prophecy and the fulfillment. Some of these were made centuries. Now, again, we're not going to leave these up here in order for you to write all of them down, but I want you to look in the right column. Here are the prophecies made in the left column, and I want you to look at the right column. How many years before this ever took place were they made? 4,000 years, 2,000 years, 1,000 years, 750 years, 500 plus years, 440 years. Is that a lot of years? I mean, the last one made by Malachi is only in the 400 range. Everything else is more than that. Which one of these guys in the left-hand column who's making those prophecies, which one of those guys? Whether you're reading from Malachi or Zechariah or Isaiah, whether you're reading from David or from Moses, which one of those guys in the left-hand column could impact the fulfillment hundreds of years? They're dead. They can't do zip about fulfilling those, helping those. What does that indicate? They just wrote it down. And again, this is just 7. And again, look at the specificity even that you have on these things and how specific these prophecies are. Number 3, these messianic prophecies that were made were beyond human control to fulfill. What does that mean? You know, you could make a prophecy, or a prophecy could be made, and Jesus could come along. Did Jesus know the Old Testament? I mean, he spent years of his life studying the Old Testament. So he could come along and say, oh, there's a prophecy. Oh, I need to do that. I need to go and do that so I can fulfill it. Oh, there's another prophecy. Well, I need to go and do that. If I go and do that, I can make myself the Messiah. Oh, there's another prophecy. If I go and do that, I can be the Messiah. Well, there's certainly some of those, right? Certainly some prophecies you could read and you could be, I'll go fulfill that, I'll go do that, I'll go do that, and say, oh, look at me, I'm the Messiah. But were there some of these prophecies that would be completely out of your control? Think about the 14 that we've already put on the screen. How many of those would have been completely out of his control? But what about these 8? Did you control where you were born? I was born in Gardens Hospital. Long time ago, back in the 20th century. Did I control where I was born? I didn't have a say. I didn't get a vote. I was just born there. You think Jesus could control where he was born? You think he could control when he was a baby whether Herod really murdered those children or not? You think he could control and just force his friend to betray him? Do you think he could control and force people to crucify him? Do you think he could control that there were going to be other sinners who were murdered with him? Do you think he could control what those soldiers did with his garments? Do you think after he was dead, he could control whether they broke his legs or not? How many of the prophecies of the 332 that were made about Jesus, how many of them were completely outside of somebody's ability to control whether they were fulfilled or not? And all we've looked at tonight, all I've put on the screen are 22 of the 332 prophecies that are made about Jesus. Jesus did not just fulfill 22, Jesus fulfilled all 332 of those prophecies. What are the odds? What are the odds? What are the odds that of the 332 prophecies that a man could fulfill? And you've heard some of these before, but I want you to think about how astronomically impossible it was for somebody to fulfill all of these prophecies. And before I get to those, I want to share with you some other odds. All right, just to help put this number that we're going to have at the bottom of the screen, just to help put this in context. All right. So, what are the odds of you being struck by lightning? You might want to write this down because that's a real possibility, right? What are the odds of you being struck by lightning? 1 in 600,000. You're feeling a little bit better now, aren't you? 1 in 600. I mean, you're like, hey, I mean, there's only a few people in this auditorium, so it's probably going to be somebody else and not me. You don't have very good odds of getting struck by lightning, do you? What are the odds of being attacked by a shark? 1 in 11.5 million. You've got a better chance of being struck by lightning multiple times than you ever have. But you feeling better about going to the beach? I mean, there's a lot of people. 1 in 11.5 million. That's the odds of you being attacked by a shark. I probably shouldn't put this one up there because you shouldn't be doing this anyway. But what are the odds of, I'll just say a person, we'll say it that way in generic sense. What are the odds of a person winning Powerball with one ticket? 1 in 292 million. You know there's just over that number of people in the country? You feel like that's a really good thing for us to do? Not very good chance of winning the Powerball. You know what's even worse than that? What are the odds of winning the $1 million? And I don't even know if McDonald's still does this. Does McDonald's still do their Monopoly game? I don't even know. So what are the odds of winning the $1 million in the McDonald's Monopoly game? 1 in 450 million. You've been playing that for years, haven't you? You've been peeling those stickers off. I'm going to win it. You've been peeling them off the fries and off the drink. I'm going to win. What are the odds of you winning that? You weren't going to win. They weren't going to let you win the $1 million. McDonald's is charging a lot for their burgers, but they're not going to give you $1 million. What are the odds of you being killed by a meteorite? You ever thought about that? You hadn't until right now. But it's okay, because the odds of you being killed by a meteorite are 1 in 840 million. You're feeling pretty good, right? You're like, that's not going to happen to me. You're right, because the odds of that happening, just not within reach. All right, I put all of those on the screen to put it into this context. Do you see how many zeros, by the way, are on the 840 million? You see the zeros that are there? What are the odds of one man fulfilling, not 332, forget that number for just a minute. What are the odds of one man fulfilling just 8 of the, 8? What are the odds of one man fulfilling 8 of the, just 8, not 332. Let's keep this simple for us in kindergarten, right? What are the odds of one man fulfilling just 8 of those prophecies? 1 in 100 quadrillion. That's the odds of one man fulfilling. So do you see how many zeros? Those of you who are in the upper math classes, all right, that's 1 to 10 to the 17th power. The 17th power means you got 17 zeros on the end of that. That doesn't sound like there's a very good chance of one man fulfilling 8 prophecies, is there? No, there's not. And so there's a man by the name of Josh McDowell who wrote a number of books on Christian evidences. And the one that I think is particularly a good book, except for the last chapter, if you buy it for your kids, go to the last chapter and tear the last chapter of the book out. Just give it to your kids and say, we got a discount on this one. You just tear the last chapter out because it's not good. It's not biblical. But the chapters, and you're gonna buy the book just to see what the last chapter is, right? All right, so the information leading up to it, it's about his belief about how you become saved, which is not according to the Bible, all right? There's your clue. All right, but everything leading up to that is evidence for God, evidence for the Bible being inspired of God, evidence for Jesus being the Son of God. And he's got a chapter in there about these prophecies, a chapter in there that proves Jesus is the Son of God. And so he took this number 8, and he quoted from a mathematician by a man by the name of Peter Stoner, all right? So I'm going to put, and here's the book, here's the page number. Here's what he said. So he says the following, this is Josh McDowell writing. Following probabilities are taken from Peter Stoner to show that coincidence is ruled out by the science of probability. Well, of course, I mean, somebody along the way was eventually going to fulfill those prophecies. I mean, it's just coincidence that happened. And Stoner said, coincidence? No, sir, that doesn't happen. And so here's what he said. Here's the odds of one man fulfilling these 8 prophecies, and there's your number, 1 in 100 quadrillion, 17 zeros. Now, some of you have heard this before, but his illustration that he uses, I love the illustration. So we can't fathom this number, can we? I mean, does that look like your bank account right there? Does that look like the balance in your bank? I mean, you take off 1 or 2 zeros and you're close, right? So, I mean, we can't fathom what that number even is. And so Stoner said, let me illustrate for you. Raise your hand if you've ever driven across Texas. Anybody ever driven I-10 across Texas? Oh, bless your hearts. You deserve like a special medal. That's like the worst place that's the most boring drive, I-10 across Texas. And some of you are going to argue with me later, but you're going to be wrong because that's the most boring place to drive on all creation. But the state of Texas is big, isn't it? I mean, it takes forever to get across. So Stoner said, here's the deal. You want to understand this? His illustration is that you take 100 quadrillion silver dollars and lay them across the entire state of Texas. And after you put one layer of those silver dollars, stack those silver dollars up 2 feet deep across the state of Texas. And he says, now mark one of those silver, just put an X on one of those silver dollars, and then stir all up those silver dollars, blindfold a man, send him into the state of Texas, and tell him, go as far as you want. Walk as far as you want across the state of Texas. But at some point, what you need to do is bend down, dig down into that 2 feet deep of silver dollars, grab one out, pick it up, and say, this is the one that's marked. What are the odds of that happening? Of a blindfolded man walking across Texas, digging down in 2 feet of silver dollars, picking one up and saying, this is the one that's marked. And Stoner says, that's the odds of one man fulfilling 8 prophecies. Is that possible? You know it's not possible. We won't get into this. This slide will be on the website tomorrow. This is even more in depth, and for me, it just goes right over the head because he starts talking about electrons. And my brain's not big enough to think about the small enough of the electrons. I have no, but he talks about What he does with this is he says, what about 48? What if we just go up? He's still not even talking about 332. He just said, what about 48? And he starts talking about electrons. And you get into this and you see how big of a number that is. 10 to the, where is it? 150, that's 157 zeros. That'd take you all day just to write all those zeros. And he's just talking about 48. One more quote I want to give you. This is from a brother who passed several years ago named Hugo McCord. If you have a chance to get his little book on From Heaven or From Men, probably, it's not in print anymore, obviously. This book is probably 80 years old, so you'd have to find it used. Great little book. Probably, if the McDowell book is a little bit bigger and maybe a little bit more than you can handle, but the From Heaven or From Men book, really good book from Hugo McCord. But he's got a section there where he does a similar thing to what McDowell does, and he talks about the law of probability. And hopefully these numbers won't escape us. He says, what if it's 50 prophecies, not 332? If only 50 prophecies about Jesus had been made, assuming, this is important, assuming there's an equal chance for their happening or not happening. Just, it's either yes or no, equal chance. The law of probability against all 50s being fulfilled is that of the 50th power of 2 to unity. I could explain that to you if I was smart, but I can't. That is the probability, he says, that is the probability is greater than 1,125 millions, we don't talk in those terminologies, to 1, that all of these circumstances do turn up. Then to assume that the 50 events would happen, and here's another key point, that word contemporaneously, that all of these would happen at the same time, in the same man's lifetime. He says, surpasses the power of numbers to express correctly the immense improbability of it taking place. And he's still only talking about 50. Now, next paragraph is important. The previous paragraph deals with the law of probability as regards inanimate objects. He says it gets worse than that. He says it does not consider the will or acts of free agents for and against God. Namely, it doesn't take into account the passions of people. It doesn't take into account the ambition of princes. It doesn't take into account the studies of wise people or what the wicked might do. It doesn't take into account the wars that might come up or the revolutions. He says it doesn't even take all of that into account. It's just inanimate. Does it happen or not happen? Well, what about the influence of all these other things? He says it doesn't even take that. It's hard to figure out how all that fits. Last paragraph from him. He takes it up to 100. Still, we haven't reached 300. He says if only 100 prophecies had been made, the chance that they would happen to one man is less than all the drops of water if the entire globe was water. Not just the water on the earth, but if the entire globe was water, it'd be less than that. Less than that it could be. But not 50, nor 100, but 332 prophecies of Christ have been counted. As you think about these smart people, these mathematicians who look at the probability, and they haven't even talked about how many prophecies were actually made. We looked at the specificity. We looked at the fact that there were years in between them. We looked at the fact that there were prophecies that no man could manipulate whether they were actually fulfilled to him or not. We've looked at the improbability of these things happening. What's the conclusion of all this? You're like, yeah, give it to me. Just get the bottom line. What's the conclusion of all of this? You can't walk away from all of this and say anything else but Jesus is the Son of God. That's the only conclusion. There's no way to walk, well, I really don't think that's the case. Well, you can think something different all day long, but when the evidence is screaming at you, I lay down a black sock, and I come and lay down some navy pants next to it. Well, I think they're black. Does it really matter what you think? If there's a black sock there, and I lay some navy pants down, and I say, I think those are black. Does your thinking they're black change them into black somehow? They're still navy. Your thinking about it didn't change it. When God lays out 332 prophecies, and Jesus fulfills every single one of them in specificity and certainty, the only conclusion we can walk away from that is to say, yep, He is the Son of God. He did fulfill all of those prophecies, and while I may choose not to believe in Him, while I may choose not to submit myself to Him, while I may choose to say, you know what, I want to live my life and do what I want, that's on me. But that's me shouting back in the face of the evidence that is so crystal clear. What does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with you? Very quickly. What does that have to do with me? Folks, I can confess with absolute certainty, I believe Jesus is the Son of God. I can know that my faith is built on solid evidence. He really was raised from the dead. Acts chapter 1 and verse 3 says that those proofs are infallible. I can know that I have absolutely no reason to be ashamed. I can know that my labor for Him is not in vain. A whole chapter proving He was raised. In the end of the chapter, Paul says, your labor is not in vain. Keep working for the Lord. I can know that walking by faith in Christ is better than walking by sight. The whole world's walking by sight. Guess what you're walking by? Certainty that Jesus is the Son of God. I can gladly submit to His authority in my life, and I'll do it because He is the Son of God. I can know that it is always right to do right. You know how I know that? Because the book that tells me about Jesus is the book that tells me how to do right in the sight of God. Read how many times you find that in the book of Deuteronomy. I can know that. It's always right to do right because this book tells me that. I can know personally the God who I worship. I can know that at the end of this world, the end of days, just like Jesus was raised from the dead, my body will be raised. And number 10, I can know there is a heavenly reward waiting me. Have you seen that heavenly reward? Haven't seen it. But who said He was going to prepare a place for you? The one who fulfilled 332 specific Old Testament prophecies made hundreds of years before He ever came. Do you believe with all of your heart that Jesus is the Son of God? The evidence is overwhelming. Aren't you glad? Your faith is not blind. People can make fun of you all they want. That's on them. Your faith is not a blind faith. Your faith is built on evidence. And it's that evidence that Paul took everywhere he went. Acts chapter 17 says it was his custom everywhere that he went to do the very same thing, to lay out those Old Testament prophecies and to lay next to it Jesus of Nazareth and to say, you draw your conclusions, but the only valid conclusion is this Jesus is the Son of God. Put your faith in Him. Where are you in your relationship with Him tonight? Do you have absolute confidence in the salvation that He offers you? Do you have absolute confidence that you have been saved in the way that the Bible says to be saved? God tells us that we need to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And with that faith, not a blind faith, with that faith so deeply embedded in our soul that we absolutely know with certainty that He came and He died on that cross and He was raised from the dead and He fulfilled prophecy. By doing that, He did that for me in order that my sins might be forgiven. And if you're ready to give your life to Him tonight, be baptized into Christ so that you can have the forgiveness of all of your sins, you can do that. But before you're baptized tonight, you know what we're going to ask you? Do you believe with all of your heart that Jesus is the Son of God? The most important question that you'll ever be asked. The answer to that question is not insignificant, and nor is the answer to that question something that you've got to guess at? You know it to be true. If you need to get your life right with Him, why don't you do it right now as together we stand and sing.